Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to our first session and gathering of the US group and focus on international financial reporting for nonprofits. I want to thank you for your time. I know it's a very busy time of year for everyone, and B, thank you for your interest and making your voice count and be heard as we're all working on this important project together. I want to begin by introducing our presenters today. If you could advance one more slide, Jeff. So first myself, I'm Ivana Stevens, and I am the Chief Financial Officer and Executive Vice President at the International Youth Foundation, or IYF. We love our acronyms here, and really glad to be in the acting role of country champion for the United States on this project. And my other speakers that are joining us today include Jeff Mechanic. He is the Assistant Director for Non-Public Entities with FASB, also the Financial Accounting Standards Board, and one of our TAG members for this important team, as well as Sam Musoke, who is our Project Director for the International Financial Reporting for Nonprofit Organizations, or IFR for NPO, for Humentum, and she is joining us today from Uganda. I want to ask everyone, if you have time, if you can make sure that on your name is appearing, so that as we go into breakouts later on in the session, your colleagues will be able to see who they're meeting and speaking with. And we're going to start out with a brief little activity I like to do called cameras on and cameras off. So I'm going to ask everybody to turn your cameras off. And in order to fully participate in this experience, you're ideally going to be able to use your camera. But I understand depending on where you're connecting and internet, it may be hard. So we're going to start out with cameras off. And this is just a get to know who's in the room, the virtual room activity. So turn your cameras on if it is the evening and dark where you are connecting from today. All right, Sam, you're with us.
Just about. It's 11 o'clock, 11 p.m. here.
All right, cameras off. Turn your cameras on if it is the afternoon or still daytime where you're joining today. All right. We're at about like half and half there. Okay, cameras off. Cameras on if you are with an international NGO or nonprofit organization. Okay, quite a few of us. Cameras off. Cameras on if you are with a community-based or a domestic nonprofit organization. And it looks like we don't have any today. That's okay, as we go, perhaps, well, or just one, I think I saw. All right, and then final question, turn your cameras on if you are just so enthusiastic and excited about developing one set of international financial reporting standards for nonprofit organizations. Fantastic. I think we're all connected and aligned there. So thank you for playing along. This is just a fun little activity I like to do in this virtual environment where we're not all gathered together like we used to be this time last year. All right, and if you could advance to the next slide, Jeff.
Ready?
Next, I want to ask everybody if you could take a moment to drop in the chat your name, just your first name, your role, and the organization you're with. And this will help us all get a sense of who's with us today for this conversation. Great, I see we have a few folks from Humentum, grants managers, directors of grants. COOs, CFOs, finance operations, very diverse group representing the nonprofit community today. So thank you all for joining. And we want to welcome you. I mean, this meeting is for all of us, and it is the start to a process that we will be continuing for some time. So I want to start, before we go into deep dive into this session, go over the meeting agenda for today. If you could advance one slide, Jeff.
Sure. Hold on one second. Go ahead.
So we have about 15 minutes. I think we're maybe a little going faster than scheduled there for our welcomes and introductions. We're going to spend 25 minutes to talk more in depth about the project of IFR for NPO. And we're going to spend some time in small groups or staying and coming back together as a group to talk about what questions we have. What are the opportunities and benefits of this project? What are some of the barriers or challenges that we might face in this project, and come back and share together? And then we're going to walk through the participation in the consultation process for this initiative, as well as close out with next steps. And while we have 2 hours allocated, we may very well get through our time today in 90 minutes and give you all 30 minutes back to your day or your evening. For some of us that it's already later. And I want to, as we're discussing the issues of financial reporting for nonprofits, keeping in mind that we are all coming from a diverse group of nonprofits and financial reports, and whether, you know, the work that we're doing around the world, we're obviously connected together today to focus on the USA lens, but we want to keep in mind that we are a group of you know, organizations, whether we are focusing on health, social services and inclusion, education and research, environmental protection, and other forms of advocacy, aid, religion, culture, et cetera, in development. So our goal is to bring our unique lenses, but to look at our overall collective approach as nonprofit organizations. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Jeff, who is going to talk more in depth about IFR for NPO.
Thank you, Ivana, and welcome all. So first of all, we will take about 20 minutes to introduce you to the IFR for NPO project. Apologies to those who may already be familiar with it, but hopefully this will be a good, quick reminder and make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to the later parts of this meeting. So I'm now about to play a video for you.
IFR for NPO is a 5-year initiative to develop the first ever internationally applicable financial reporting guidance for non-profit organizations. It's coordinated by Humentum and the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. You probably know that businesses have international financial reporting standards, and governments have international public sector accounting standards. But the not-for-profit sector has no equivalent. This undermines the consistency and usefulness of financial reports, and ultimately harms the sense of trust and accountability that is so central to its effectiveness. The current system is also inefficient, with duplication of effort for both NPO and funders in meeting multiple and at times conflicting financial requirements. An academic study in 2014 received responses from 179 countries. 72% of respondents agreed that an international standard for NPOs would be useful. So, the IFR for NPO project is answering this call. By engaging a wide range of stakeholders, the new guidance will command support from the accounting community and NPOs, as well as those that fund and regulate them. The guidance is being developed in a technically rigorous 3-step process, involving a consultation phase and development of an exposure draft, with final guidance available from early 2025. With the goal that at least 10 countries will use the guidance by 2030, with more to follow. The project has a technical advisory group involving national standard setters from every continent and an official observer from the International Accounting Standards Board. and the Practitioner Advisory Group helps us ensure the guidance will meet users' needs. The founding funders share our vision for this game-changing project. We have the opportunity of a generation. We can increase accountability and transparency while reducing inefficiency in the current system.
I mean, I hope that video has given you a sense of just how important and exciting exciting a project this is. One question that often arises is which types of nonprofit financial reports this project is developing guidance for. Nonprofits may produce different types of financial reports, so it's important to be clear which reports are and are not the focus of this IFR for NPO project. All the transactions of a nonprofit organization should be entered into their accounting system, which classifies and summarizes these transactions to various financial reports. Some reports are for use by internal managers only. When NPOs implement donor-funded projects, they're often required to produce special purpose reports specifically for that donor about the project. And every year, the organization produces its annual audited financial statements, which are also known as general purpose financial statements. Now, these all come from the same accounting system, at least ideally. The IFR for NPO project is focusing on the general purpose financial statements and any accompanying narrative reports. Of course, the different types of reports are connected because they're created from the same source transactions, or some of them, and the same accounting system. Humentum is also working on another project to harmonize donor project reporting formats, which is connected but different. So I am a member of the technical advisory group, the TAG of this initiative, and I was nominated for that by my organization, the Financial Accounting Standards Board. I'm really excited to be part of this, doing a lot of the nitty-gritty legwork and trying to help make a set of standards happen here. While this is not an official initiative of the FASB is very supportive of this project, and that's why they nominated me to be part of this group. Why? Because even though we have US GAAP here in the United States, we see this as being a key benefit to stakeholders here, grantors and others, and we'll explain a bit about that as we go along. And we also see, and I also personally see, benefit to future standard setting here in the US. We can learn a lot when we set US GAAP from the best ideas of international standard setters. And I've had the pleasure and opportunity to work with many of them over the years, and I get to continue doing so as part of this project. And I'm really excited about that. Now, joining us today is Dorothy Malloy from USAID, who is a member of our practitioner advisory group. And I'm going to let Dorothea tell you a little bit about that.
Thank you, Jeff, and warm greetings to everyone here in this session. I have the privilege to serve as a member of the project's Practitioner Advisory Group, or PAG, as we're known. In this capacity, it's been a wonderful experience to collaborate with global colleagues on this important accountancy profession initiative. I want to emphasize the previous point that Jeff made just a short time ago, that there is a difference between this initiative and the periodic donor reporting that's required, especially, as you may know, of USAID. And as Jeff mentioned, the goal of this initiative is the global applicability of accountancy guidance for NPO's general purpose financial statements. And I want to highlight, as you may know, that USAID does have published guidance in this respect on the accountancy for a NPO with their accounting financial statements. And in our published guidance, we are very flexible. We provide that either an NPO can use generally accepted principles in the US, in their cooperative country, or in accordance with international standards. So we do have published guidance about grantees' financial statements with the flexibility of what type of accountancy guidance would be used to promulgate these general purpose financial statements. I think going forward with this initiative, especially for NPOs in countries that do not have national standards, and you'll hear that the gap for international standards exists. I think for the profession to have this initiative come in and work on guidance for NPOs to be able to use to create their general purpose financial statements will benefit greatly the accountancy profession globally. Over to you, Jeff.
Okay, thank you, Dorothea. So which stakeholders are being considered in this project? At an international level, the IFR for NPO project is responding to challenges expressed by three broad groups of stakeholders. First, we have the users or readers of financial statements. General purpose financial reports aim to meet the needs of a range of users. This would include donors, but also regulators, service users, which we also call beneficiaries or clients or members, and the public, as well as banks, collaborating partners, suppliers, and staff. In this USA meeting, many of us in the room will be users, readers of the financial statements of other entities overseas, and it is in that context that the IFR for NPO project has the most resonance for us. Within this group of users, large donors are particularly influential. If the requirements of the IFR for NPO guidance conflict with some donor reporting requirements, that'll cause problems for NPOs. Donors themselves use general purpose financial reports for due diligence and understanding the organization as a whole. And for that reason, the IFR for NPO initiative is engaging with donors in a donor reference group. The second important group of stakeholders are those who prepare financial statements, in other words, the nonprofit organizations themselves. In the USA context, this project is of less immediate relevance as domestic nonprofit organizations follow US GAAP, the FASB's requirements. And then finally, the third group of stakeholders is auditors who provide assurance about whether the financial statements present the nonprofit organization's financial position and financial results fairly. They're often at the front line of supporting nonprofits to implement and apply applicable accounting standards or guidance. The IFR for NPO project does not represent any particular group, but it's keen to develop the guidance that balances the costs and benefits to the different stakeholder groups. So what will this project actually deliver? What change will it bring about? Well, many of the challenges expressed by stakeholders stem from the core problem that there's no internationally applicable standard for how nonprofit organizations prepare their annual financial statements. Where countries do not have national standards, this leads to inconsistency even within the same jurisdiction. For larger international nonprofits, inconsistency between countries makes consolidation difficult and expensive. When funders look at the financial statements of potential grantees, they might find it difficult to assess financial capability or understand the wider context for a particular project. This results in expensive and often duplicative processes for due diligence, financial reporting, and auditing. The lack of clarity and consistency ultimately reduces the transparency in the sector, which makes funders nervous, especially about double funding fraud, which is harder to spot given the focus on project-based reports. The solution that the IFR for NPO project is providing is internationally applicable guidance for how nonprofits should prepare their annual general purpose financial reports. It would be up to a particular country to decide whether to adopt or align to the guidance and whether certain nonprofits within their jurisdiction should be required to or allowed to follow it. The future outcomes and benefits are wide-ranging. For nonprofits applying the guidance, it means they'll be better able to demonstrate their capability, their capacity, and attract funds, as well as supporting the provision of decision-useful information for governance and management. For funders, it contributes to better and more efficient due diligence, which is a win for nonprofits as well. And having clear guidance simplifies and improves the value of audit assurance. One of the really important outcomes from this project, skipped on, separate from the guidance itself, is the creation of the global community stakeholders able to engage and collaborate to solve sector-wide issues, and this has never existed before. Ultimately, we believe that the guidance will contribute to a more resilient and accountable sector that is better able to attract, generate, and utilize funds to achieve positive social good. So who's behind the project? The project is being implemented by two organizations, Humentum and SIPFA. Humentum, as many of you know, is a global association that convenes nonprofit professionals and inspires sector-wide change. You may have heard of Inside NGO or Mango, who together merged to form Humentum back in 2017. SIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, is UK-based, United Kingdom-based, with standard-setting roles for local government and charities, but it also plays an important role as an international convener on public sector accounting issues. And both Humentum and SIPFA are themselves nonprofit organizations. Between them, the project partners are well connected to a range of stakeholders within the sector that are crucial to this project. So this is really a by the sector for the sector type of initiative. Seed funding to enable the project to launch has been provided by the Open Society Foundations and the Ford Foundation, but the project is not yet fully funded. The project also has advisory groups who offer perspectives and expertise on a voluntary basis. If you look closely, you can see me. I'm part of the technical advisory group, and I think we could probably spot Dorothy, as there she is, as part of the practitioner advisory group. Now, the technical advisory group, or the TAG, comprises national accounting standard setters from 6 continents, and the practitioner advisory group, or PAG, includes preparers, users, auditors, academics, and others specializing in nonprofits. We're deliberately and proactively seeking to build and maintain diversity in both of these groups. Information about each member and details of all the meetings can be found on the project website, so the process is fully transparent. Now, we've looked a bit at the why this project is important, clarified what the project will achieve, and who the project partners, stakeholders, and advisors are. Now we'll get an overview of the how and when by looking at the phases and timelines. The project is a 3-phase process equivalent to all other standard setting processes. Phase 1 is the consultation phase, and the key output is a consultation paper. That presents questions for structured input from stakeholders. And we'll talk more about this consultation paper later on in this meeting. The second phase is the development phase, where we analyze the feedback from the consultation and use that as an evidence base to develop draft guidance, which is exposed for comment. This output is called an exposure draft. And then the third phase takes stock of the feedback from the exposure draft and puts through changes before launching the final guidance, which, as the video said, is expected to be in early 2025. But developing the guidance is really just the beginning. The benefits will be felt after it is widely adopted and used. This is why there are 2 key aspects of the IFR for NPO project design. One aspect is the technical rigor applied in the guidance development process led by SIPFA, and as we're talking about, heavily and also involving the technical advisory group, or TAG. The other is the stakeholder engagement led by Humentum, actively reaching out to stakeholders all over the world, regulators, national professional accountancy organizations, donors, and nonprofits to participate in the development process so they are ready and willing to adopt it when the guidance is done. And again, the PAG, the Practitioner Advisory Group, is a key group helping in this regard. So how are we doing in terms of outreach? Let me just move on to the last slide that I'll be covering. The project already has engagement from people all over the world. Countries in blue are those where individuals have signed up or registered their interest in this project. They include a broad range of stakeholders, including both international and local nonprofits, their auditors, accountancy bodies, regulators, donors, and others. The yellow flags show members of the technical advisory group of national standard setters. So I'm right here as the yellow. The purple flag On the other hand, it shows members of the practitioner advisory group. So this would be Dorothea right now. And the black flags show the various country champions working to engage stakeholders in their countries to ensure their voices are heard. So this black here is Ivana. So I'm going to now send it over to I don't know if it's Sam or not who will be presenting this, or it'll be Tim.
I think we're back to Ivana actually.
Okay. I saw your name, Sam. That's why I wasn't sure.
All right.
Ivana.
So we were all ready to, pass the baton as needed. So for what we want to do now, and thank you so much, Jeff, for that really thorough and robust introduction. We've gone over which financial reports we are talking about for our NPO community. We've gone over the advisory groups and the stakeholders, as well as the timeline that we have in mind. And now we want to actually get into smaller groups together. And we're going to spend 15 minutes in these breakout groups. And there are 5 things we want you to focus on. First, say hello, give some brief introductions, get to know some of your peers and colleagues here. Identify someone from your group who will take notes and report back out. And the 3 things we want you to brainstorm. What are some of the benefits of this initiative? What are some of the barriers to this initiative moving forward in this timeline? And then what questions do you have that you think that we should be considering and answering as we go throughout this process? So benefits, barriers, and questions. And at this time, I believe Sam is going to take it away in getting everyone into their breakout groups.
Welcome back, everybody. And I hope Ivana.
Yes, we're back. So what we want to do now is take the next 20 minutes or so, I believe, and share back to the full group what we discussed in our smaller groups. And again, we want to be able here to collect, consolidate, what questions did your group come up with that need to be answered? If you could share 2 questions, as well as 2 benefits that your group identified, and then 2 challenges / solutions that we should consider. And feel free to raise your hand, use the raise your hand feature, and I think we will then be able to call on you to share.
Should I, Ivana, should I stop sharing my deck right
Yes.
now? I think it might be helpful here, right?
Mhm.
Let me just do that. At some point I will.
And I am.
Hold on.
There's a rush, Jeff. You could share it. We could have 20 minutes of chat. Being able to see each other is quite nice. You can share it.
Yeah, I'm just looking to do this properly without messing things up. Why am I not getting to? Hold on, let me.
Yeah, Jeff, you're not sharing already, if that's what.
Oh, already I'm not sharing? Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
All right, that's great. All right, so let me just.
And we're also a small enough group that
There we go.
maybe you don't have to raise your hand. You could just go off mute, introduce yourself, and share back with us what your team discussed.
There we go.
So I'll jump in what we talked about. Kim Schwartz from PSI was with me, and we did talk about donor reporting being, our biggest headache. And but I don't think we are quite focusing on this in this initiative that you guys are doing. But maybe one day you can. I think we don't completely want to let that fall off, because that is, I think, for everybody a huge headache. Yeah, and then I think the other thing that was raised towards the end, Kim, was talking about a West African group. Kim, if you can mention the name.
Sure. We work in several West African countries, and it has come up, the requirement for the statutory reporting to follow something called OHADA, OHADA, I think it is. And it is sort of a third tier besides IFRS or GAAP that they are asking and requiring of organizations, including nonprofits, to standardize in the West African countries of Africa. So just to put that out there, you might want to see what are those types of requirements that they're asking for, and how different, or whether or not there could be some, include them in somehow in the standardization work.
Yeah. Let me just ask, is Sierra Leone in West Africa?
Yeah, that would probably cover
Yes,
them.
we have a member of our tag who is from Sierra Leone, and just wondered maybe on our next meeting we could talk with him about that a little bit.
The other thing, I mean, we did talk about the benefits of this. We do think there are benefits to working towards some standardization, certainly where we have multiple countries that have to do statutory reporting. Each individually have to do their own reporting. And from a kind of a corporate perspective, when you're working with your different country offices who have to do this, you're constantly having to keep like side spreadsheets and a second set of books to kind of get to what is necessary for statutory reporting. And we mentioned that it can erode trust with your auditors, where you're doing things kind of like off the books, or a different set of books to get to the numbers that they need and the presentations that they need. So it'd be nice for all of us that there, is something standard, that we don't have to be kind of playing around with different numbers to get what they need.
I can go next. I guess in our team, we had Nicola, Lorena, Nancy, and Akinimi. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. So some of the challenges that we thought was like in England, there is already extensive regulation, and adding maybe more regulation, and maybe it may not match with other countries if it is not as if it wouldn't meet the standard that England has already, then it may be not accepted, or it would be diluted with the policies they have already. So how would that be? I guess to match it with the highly regulated and not so much regulated. So how do we come up with the balance, policy or regulation? That's one. And the other one is also the cost, who's gonna cover it, the training, and also implementing it. So that's another challenge that we thought about. And the benefits that we thought is like it would give the consistency between different countries, so it would make it easier for to work together. And the other one is also it would help donors to rely on the financial statements if it's regulated and if it's standardized. And the other one is also it would make it easier to transfer knowledge between new employee and the ones leaving. Then it would be easier. So I think that's what we have, the main one.
I'll add one more thing, and I know this is about a donor, but I think it could be important to the project. If we did understand some basic criteria of how donors might evaluate your organization's financial health, and we have a foundation donor that's doing that with us, and so they've taken our audited financial statements and then they start making the numbers go all over the place. So it's okay, and a donor certainly has the right to be looking at your financial health, but if each donor looks at it differently, so what they're doing is they're using our audit, but they're manipulating a bunch of numbers. So even though this might not be about donors, if we got input from them about some basic things they'd want to see off of our financials, that would then allow them to do the analysis they want to do without us having to recreate all the numbers that they want. That could be very helpful.
I could go next. In our group, we discussed the benefits, and I know it's like sort of resonates with what everyone else has shared. The benefits really were providing, it provides greater clarity, consistency, simplicity. Having a standard format will make it easier from a grants management perspective. Also, being able to create a common language in the community, ease of comparison across our reports. The barriers really were ensuring that it is user-friendly. Otherwise, that could lead to more barriers and the resistance from organizations to buy in. The other piece, which was really key, was the timeline. It seems like the timeline is quite slow moving, and a lot can happen between now and 2025 within organizations, within the tag member, the entire group. So really ensuring how to keep the momentum going. Some of the other barriers were to ensure this does not come across as being pushed out and not like being top down, but to ensure that it addresses as being more inclusive in nature. I think from here, we also discussed some questions about the country adoption and, what kind of regulations, to what extent are the other countries' government bodies or like the other bodies involved to make sure that that does not become a hindrance. What kind of systems and resources will the organizations really require to adapt to the standard? Yeah, so these are what we had.
Shall I speak to that question, Ivana? So thank you, Nahal. So my name is Sam, and I'm joining from Uganda, and I'm the project director, and I've been having meetings like this one in 8 countries in the last couple of weeks, and another sort of 8 in the coming days as well. But your question about how we're engaging sort of regulators and those people who require NPOs in different countries to adopt certain standards. You're absolutely right. This is one of our biggest challenges, to be honest. And we've identified those regulators at country level as one of our most important stakeholders. Hugely influential, because if basically NPOs are at the mercy of what their regulators and their donors tell, that it's the donors and regulators that drive reporting practice. So we are looking at strategies for engagement both at regional level and also using our country champions to give us roads into relationships with standard setters or regulators at different country levels. So we definitely are taking a very strategic look at that. We don't have all the answers yet, but that's one of the reasons, one of the fewer reasons why it takes so long. There's all the consultation, it takes it a long time, but also building that buy-in. We could write something with 3 people in a room in a couple of weeks probably, but then nobody would adopt it. So building all this buy-in so that regulators are ready, so that you know, people are ready to adopt it is the big challenge. In different countries where we've been talking about this, quite often on the ground, they're saying, wow, this is going to be an adoption challenge. We're going to have to prepare. So people like the Institute of Certified Public Accountants in Uganda, they're thinking now, where are we going to get funding from? How are we going to do this? How are we going to support our members to bring this about? So there's quite a lot of energy for that at national level. But let me stop there. I've already said too much probably.
And I would just add, Sam, one thing we discussed about that is considering that consultation process and the timeline, that we probably need to also build in as a potential solution, like succession planning within each of us as part of the community, because a lot changes in 5 to 10 years. And so I'm already thinking, like, who is it at IYF that I need to make sure is like plugged in and participating when we have our next round of meetings, because that's going to be very important to keep the momentum going.
I can't resist saying, as Tim, I'm the chair of the Practitioners Advisory Group, that when we first mooted this idea with the International Accounting Standards Board, they said you should expect it to take 40 years. So we're actually bringing it in 30 years ahead of schedule already. So there you go.
I don't know too much that takes longer than that. So I think people younger than me will have to be involved. I will definitely be retired.
There's another comment that she seems to have gone, that lady who was reporting back from the second group about standards in the UK. And I think what's really exciting about this project is looking at the TAG, the Technical Advisory Group, where we have Jeff from the US, we've got Jenny from the UK, we've got New Zealand, Australia, Sierra Leone, Colombia, Canada, nearly all the countries that have their own not-for-profit national standards are at the table, bringing the best of what they have, learning from each other, and we're hoping to get a best of. So even in the UK, we had this meeting in the UK, and I think Nicola here is probably far better placed to speak on this than I am, but I think there is a hope that the UK and all other countries might over time converge to one thing, rather than the risks that we have at the moment of diverging more and more over time. But Nicola, would you like to say something about that?
Yes, I'm eavesdropping on this side of your side of the pond, because I've been working with our statement of required practice is being reviewed at the moment, and there's a lot of emphasis on reflecting the size of charities a bit better in what we require them to do. So I thought I'd see if I could pick up some tips from around the world on how it's done in different countries, so we can bring best practice. I mean, our problem is we have a lot of rules, but basically if your organization doesn't fit what the current rules are, there's not very much for you that helps. It's just, oh, well, if you're not prepared to do full accounts, FRS, blah, 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 then you've got to do receipts and payments. It's such a binary cutoff. So we need something a bit more nuanced, but not incomprehensible. Hello to Janine's cat. Mine's banging on the door. Working from home. Yeah, so we're at the beginning. I think we're due to report on the new SORP on my 70th birthday. So I think I might have to get my kids involved in it.
Thanks for that, Nikki.
I could talk a lot, but I won't. I'll just leave it at that.
And there's another comment that was said that also really resonated with me and really matches what I heard from Turkey yesterday. We had 279 people in the meeting from Turkey and the Middle East yesterday.
Wow.
And I know. And one of the things that came out was, how can you make sure this is an access builder and an enabler rather than just another thing to comply with and just another thing that I can't comply with and another barrier to access, which I think resonated with somebody else's comment. Certainly one of the things that the tag have been talking, and the PAG, all the discussions, when we're looking at who is this for, we want it to be really relevant for smaller and medium-sized organizations. This mustn't be so complicated that you've got to be huge and massively resourced to be able to apply it. And that's precisely why, if we look at the way the guidance is being developed, with all the choices and decisions that we're kind of making are very much with that lens. And that was one of the very first conversations, is who is our primary who we want to make this work for. And I think that will be something that we need to constantly remind ourselves, because I think there's always a temptation to add some more beauty, technical. Yeah. And we always need to be pulled back to what's practical, what's workable, what's going to work for the majority. And that's, I think, a constant sort of tension in this development process. And I think that's why it's so good. We are hearing voices from so many different people and getting feedback from so many different stakeholders.
Can I just make another point from the UK on that very point? Our problem is that it's so complicated to implement what we currently have that people rely on their independent examiners, for instance, if they're a medium-sized charity, a small one. And now the Charity Commission's got cross with the independent examiners because they're saying, well, they're not good enough. They're not doing it properly, not doing a good enough job of independent examination. That should be something that the Charity Commission needs to look in the mirror and say to themselves, how can we have made it so complicated that qualified people can't implement it properly, never mind your actual genuine stakeholders. So there needs to be some reflection by the regulators about what it is that they're seeking to achieve in order not to make it increasingly complex. Tim, you're nodding. I hope you're agreeing with me from where you are.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, because often we forget that management and the trustees are the very important users and probably the most frequent users of accounts. And if they can't really get their head around what the numbers mean, then how can they be good stewards of the organization?
Great. Anyone else have anything to contribute? I think this was a really rich discussion and brainstorm session. So thank you all for sharing, some of the benefits I think we can all agree on, as well as the barriers and questions we still need to tackle. And so I think this is a nice segue. I'm going to pass the baton to Sam and Jeff. I think Jeff is going to, or Sam is, I don't know who's sharing.
Reshare, yeah.
Okay, you're going to reshare, and Sam is going to now talk us through the consultation process and that phase that we're going to be launching right at the start of the new year with high energy, just as Sam has at 11:30 at night when we get into this. So over to you, Sam.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much.
Just give me a second to get this back to where it was. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. So if you remember back to the session that Jeff led us through, he talked about the 3-stage process. And stage 1 is this consultation process. And as it came out in the conversation as well, it's going to be so important that we get feedback from lots of stakeholders. And that's precisely what this is. So the next section of this presentation or this meeting, we're just going to take a look at some of the questions around this consultation process. So who should be participating and why? What exactly is in this consultation paper, and how practically can people respond? So in terms of who, well, everybody here, you're all invited to. And globally, we're definitely looking at these sort of 4 groups: regulators, auditors, funders, and NPOs. I think in terms of the US context specifically, there's 2, as Jeff mentioned, 2 main lenses that are most important. Funders, and that can also be INGOs who are sub-grantors and use the financial reports of their grantees. Be really important. Auditors who have international networks or international firms, rely on the work of their other offices in other countries, and INPOs who have reporting entities in other countries. So if you've got branches or offices, then those would be the 3 groups I think would be most relevant from a US point of view. But anybody else as well is all welcome. Why? Now, again, this varies, but some countries are not so used to being proactively have their opinions sought. So I think this is why we're seeing huge turnout in some countries, because they're so excited to have a voice and to make sure their cultural context, the American and the English cultural context, is not usually omitted from such projects. But we're hearing, other contexts as well, which is really important. In terms of stakeholder needs, now if we think of donors, especially or grantors, if some of your needs can be more ably met in the annual general purpose financial statements, maybe if there's more interlinkage between the project reports and the annual reports, maybe this could reduce the need for quite so many audits, things like that. So I think there's a real benefit in hearing from donors who also receive project reports, but if some of their needs, some of your needs might be able to be met in the general purpose financial statements, that would make life a lot simpler. The other thing we're hearing from all over the world is, this is a lovely project, but unless our donors, who are the key drivers of our financial reporting practice, unless they buy in, this is all nice and fluffy, but no point. It won't mean anything. So the donors that they're referring to, where are they sitting? They're sitting in the US, they're sitting in the UK. They're sitting in countries, in jurisdictions outside their own. So they have their own regulators giving them requirements, often which aren't particularly relevant or helpful if they haven't got a national standard, and they've got donors that are having a big impact on their accounting policy, their expenditure classification, the way they structure and their accounting systems. And as we saw from Jeff at the beginning, you've got one accounting system that's got to produce all these different reports, unless, as Kim mentioned, we've got gazillion spreadsheets out the side. So I think that's why here, US-based stakeholders, especially in the context of grantors, super relevant. And then lastly, building credibility. Now, because this is a new project, we are building something from scratch. If IASB was issuing a standard, everybody would automatically sit up and listen. But our credibility as a project comes from the voices that we're hearing. So if we get 1,000 responses to this consultation paper, that builds credibility for us to be able to continue to raise funds to finish, and for regulators to sit up and go, this is something serious, it matters. So those are some of the reasons that we'd love you to participate. So after the who and the why, the next is the what. So what's in this consultation paper? I should mention that it's not quite final yet. It's been it's basically taken the last 14 months of effort by the TAG and the PAG and the project team to write it. It's around the 200 pages mark. So to get a sense of what it looks like. So after the executive summary and the introduction, the bulk of the paper is in part 1 and part 2, and that's where all the questions are that we're looking for feedback on. And then there's some supplementary information to give some context about the project. And then there's a glossary, which is not sort of a definitive what terms mean globally, because they have different meanings in different jurisdictions, but like, what does this term mean as we're reading the consultation paper, to give us some context for different terms. So in the next couple of slides, we're just going to take a deeper dive into part 1 and part 2. So part 1 is all about sort of framework level issues, like how to describe non-profit organizations, who are their stakeholders. It's written in plain English, and it's pitched to be accessible to a broad audience of stakeholders interested in financial reporting, not just limited to accountants. So within that part 1, each chapter presents a proposal and ends with a request for general matters for comment. So you're invited to comment on the general level matters presented in the chapter. And the questions take this basic form. Do you agree? If not, why not? And in that sense, the question's open, there's room for comment, but it's also structured. And you need to have read it, really, so before you can answer the questions and submit a comment on it. So part 2 is about specific accounting issues, like when to recognize grant income, or whether to disclose gifts in kind, how to measure inventory without sale value, that sort of thing. It's also written in plain English, and it's pitched to be accessible to a more technical audience, familiar with accounting concepts and language. So in part 2, each section describes the issue and then presents some alternative treatments. And each section ends with a request for specific matters for comment. So you're invited to comment on the specific matters presented in that section. And generally, these questions take the form, do you agree with the way we've described this issue and the alternatives that we've offered? If not, why not? And then which alternative would you prefer and why? So again, you need to read it before you can meaningfully submit responses. And what this does is it gives us as a project some really structured responses that we can analyze. And because people will explain their country and their stakeholder group when they submit responses, it enables us to really give some very rich analysis to that data and to be able to understand where there are big differences, and so that we can forge a way forward. So having looked at this overview of parts 1 and 2, let's take a bit of a deeper dive into part 1. So it's got 5 chapters. And again, let me just clarify, what I'm presenting here is the drafts as currently discussed, but if something does change between now and January the 28th, I've warned you. So the chapter 1 is all about which organizations should be considered as non-profit organizations for the purposes of this guidance. And the approach that we've taken is to propose some broad characteristics. So the question is, do you agree with the broad characteristics that we've proposed? If not, why not? I won't tell you what, yeah, you have to read the chapter to find out what the characteristics are, but that's the approach that's been taken. And it's been one of the hardest chapters to agree on. So part 1, chapter 2 is all about the external stakeholders, the users of the NPO reports. What are their information needs? As was mentioned when we were discussing, if donors are taking the accounts and unpicking them and repackaging them, what are they looking for? How can we make it easier for them to get what they want without having to rejiggle everything or rework the numbers? So that's what chapter 2 is all about. And it presents some proposals. You can see here, do you agree that the external stakeholders require information about 1, the NPO's achievement of objectives, 2, economy and efficiency, 3, compliance with restrictions and regulations, and 4, longer term health. So then the question is, do you agree? If not, why not? Which alternative areas would you propose and why? And there's more detail, obviously, within the chapter. So that's chapter 2, stakeholders and what they need. Then chapter 3 is all about the aspects of the guidance itself. So it presents some proposals. One of the questions is whether, or relates to the fact that the guidance is proposed to be on an accrual basis. Again, this has been a very hot topic. And so we're looking for feedback on how indicate what other approaches might meet the guidance objectives, explain why, or what challenges might that present, how might they be overcome. The whole chapter presents a case for why we think accrual basis is the best option, but then we're asking for feedback on that. So then chapter 4 of the consultation paper is all about existing financial frameworks. So firstly, it makes the case that we do need to start with a framework. We can't start with a completely blank piece of paper. And then it sets out the criteria for evaluating the usefulness of existing frameworks for this project. And then it assesses those frameworks against those criteria. So the existing international ones would be IFRS, IFRS for SME, and IPSAS. Those are the 3 existing international standards. So there are 3 questions, but one of them is, do you agree with the criteria that have been used to assess suitability against these frameworks? If not, why not? What other criteria do you believe could be used and why? So we're really getting feedback on that process of deciding the best starting point. And then chapter 5, which is kind of where the whole of part 1 is leading to, puts forward a proposed model for developing the guidance. And in that model, we're proposing to start with IFRS for SME, small and medium enterprises is the name of it, but it's actually for all non-public benefit entities. We're proposing to use that as a foundational framework and to build on top of that. So to plug the gaps, clarify where it doesn't really meet the needs of NPOs, and come up with a small booklet that is a one-stop shop that does cover everything, but uses IFRS as a starting point. So then the feedback we want on that is, do you have any concerns about that? So that's a snapshot of part 1. So part 2 then is this more technical, specific accounting issues. So for example, how should the financial statements be presented? Do we want fund accounting like we have in the UK or not? There are different alternatives used in different parts of the world. What is the best one? What should be included within the narrative reports that accompany these financial statements? Again, as was said, the numbers by themselves really are fairly meaningless, divorced from the activities and the impact that organizations have. So how can we strengthen that link? How should expenses be classified? How should income be recognized and measured? Grant income specifically, donations and gifts in kind that aren't common in obviously business entities. So you can see from these issues that the answers to these questions really aren't obvious. And NPOs in countries without guidance have to make up their own answers on a case-by-case basis. It can depend on who's sitting in the finance director seat, who the auditor is. It really varies, and it's nobody's fault really. It's not that there are obvious right answers and nobody's found them. There's genuine ambiguity around some of these issues. So we plan to hold webinars and some explanatory videos about each of these topics so that you can get a deeper dive, as well as obviously reading the document. So hopefully by now, having seen all those questions and issues, you're thinking, oh, I've got some opinions, I've got some expertise I would like to share. And in addition to you yourself sharing, it would be particularly helpful if you had, if you, in your network. So if you've got grantors, please share this with them so they can share their voice. Your auditors in other countries, your branch offices, your country offices. Would be super to hear your voice. So we are trying to make it easy to get the word out there so that different people can participate. 28th of January is the big launch date. And we're going to be preparing a promoter pack with tailored emails in English, French, and Spanish, with images, with links to videos, social media. So anything you can do to help us get the word out there would be a huge help. So we are looking to make it as easy as possible. People don't have to respond to the whole thing. You can just respond to the bits that are relevant. And obviously we're trying to make some videos to help unpack some of this can be fairly dense reading material and try and make it as accessible as possible. Then we're planning to hold 13 regional meetings in March to May. And the idea is that there would be sort of 60 invited stakeholders per region to get some really targeted, we'd obviously especially want to get those regulators in the room, the accounting bodies, and those big influencers who have a real ability to block this project or enable it. So that's the plan. My final word really, as users, please respond. As influencers, please help us spread the word in your country offices and grant and projects. Absolutely. So I'll hand over back to Ivana. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sam. We want to take a moment now that we're all digesting this information in case anyone has a question relating to the consultation process or the consultation paper. You can share that in the chat box, or you're free to go off of mute if there's anything you'd like to ask directly now. And Jeff, could you advance to the next slide? Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
Maybe nobody understood my English accent.
Okay. If you think of any questions, obviously you can reach out. And if you go to the next slide there, Jeff, we want to make sure to tell you about the online forum for the IFR for NPO community. It's a great place to ask those questions as you think of them, to discuss your thoughts and to meet with other people in the community. I'm going to drop in the chat the link to the website. The forum is down, just so you know. We're having some technical difficulties, but it should be back up soon. But I'm going to drop in the chat just a moment, the link to the website so that you can click on anything. And I see Sam's already done it. Brilliant. And I think I also have the link to the newsletter, LinkedIn and Twitter. So if you could advance to the next slide. We want to encourage you to subscribe to the newsletter to be in the latest in what's happening and the progress. Visit the website frequently and follow on LinkedIn as well as Twitter, and engage with the community and encourage your country office staff, encourage your colleagues, encourage the organizations, the community-based organizations that you may be working with, your auditors, consultants as well, to follow and to be part of this important conversation and this important project. And with that, we want to thank you all for participating. I think we broke the record. We were aiming for 90 minutes. I think we did it a little less. So thank you so much. If you have any questions, you can email info@ifrfornpo.org. And a big thank you to Sam, to Jeff, Dorothea, as well as Tim, and all of you for making the time to have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ivana. A country champion.
It's a very exciting project. All right. Well, have a good night or good evening, everybody, depending on, oh, sorry.